track of those, or she'll stop me periodically um, to go ahead and get those questions asked. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Watering wisely in the garden. What food crops need? First we're going to start out talking a bit about seeds and kind of just general. This is kind of like baseline information. So that is background of seeds is going to be, we need to keep them when we're trying to get our garden growing with seeds. We need to keep them consistently moist until they germinate. So whether that be there's different strategies of doing that, but it just, whether watering day after day or watering them and covering them with mulch or something of that sort. Most seeds, we should see them germinate in a few days. Some seeds can take up to 2 weeks to germinate. For example, carrots is a good example of that. So in the case of carrots, a really good technique is if you're watering, you set up a seed bed of carrots, is to plant the seeds, water them really well, and then some people will even like cover them with a piece of cardboard or a piece of plywood, just with the anticipation of that long period till they germinate and pop. And then be sure you're checking on them as it gets close to that 2 week period, and then you can pull it off, and that helps with just keeping that moisture in place instead of having to, the soil will dry out in the sun or etc. So you want to keep an eye on seeds until they pop, until they actually pop out, put their cotyledons up in the air and they germinate. And then you can kind of back off on your consistent watering. So essentially early in the life, we need to hydrate that seed to activate all the little things. The seed has all its needs to get itself started, its little cotyledons and kind of beginning food, so to speak, to get started and start to grow. And water is a huge piece of that. Once once the water absorbs, it germinates. Then the seeds actually also need to breathe. So we don't want to starve them of air by having oversaturated soil. So it's a balancing act. After germination, generally speaking, all garden plants need approximately 1 inch of water per week or one thorough watering per week. So this is just like by and far what the recommendations, if you're looking on the internet and in most reference books, like how much water do I need to be giving my plants? The general recommendation, and this is just the baseline. It's very much paying attention to your plants is the better idea. But generally speaking, as a frame of reference, we use the term, use 1 water per week. And I actually like it to say better, 1 thorough watering per week. So the idea here is that we're trying to, as the plants mature, we're trying to make sure that we're accessing water to the soil where the roots are, all the way down to where the roots will ultimately be. So we want the plants to seek out the water as they get older, deeper in the soil, because that will help them be more resilient as during drier periods, especially. So those things that are deeper rooted crops will do much better if they are seeking that water out. They have a little bit of dryness in between waterings to seek the water down further into the water table. And then when the dry period comes, there's usually more water below than towards the surface area. The other piece of the puzzle here is that water is actually also a factor in transferring nutrients from the soil to the plant. And organic living soil, like the living, all the microorganisms and creatures that live inside of soil in an organic system play a role in that. If the soil is too dried out, they will become inert or they will kind of go dormant. And so we're trying to activate the soil, and the soil biology is also a piece of the puzzle when we're kind of strategizing our watering throughout the season. We can kind of measure, you know, we have some images here of some rain gauges. So if we have, when we're doing our watering, um, Mother Nature provides for a significant, we're pretty lucky here in Michigan. Mother Nature does provide us for a significant amount of water, water to our gardens. But we do, at times have extended dry periods, and we need to pay attention in those times when we're, like I had mentioned, when we're germinating seeds. If the soil dries out too much between watering, you will need to water more to get the water to penetrate down to that ideal 6-inch depth. And I say 6-inch depth because for the most part, most vegetables don't, spread their roots much beyond 6 inches. Perennial crops and trees and other things have much deeper root systems. And that for that reason, they have the ability to require less watering because of the water table down below. So we always want to kind of check. It can be sometimes deceiving. It may, if you haven't watered the soil in a while and you water it, what it will tend to do is, if you can see my hands here, it'll kind of go down and kind of go sideways. And if it's super dry, it'll be kind of wet at the top couple inches, but dry down below. There's kind of a wicking action, especially with a lot of organic matter in the soil. So we're really trying to, always, one of the things I want you to walk away with today is put your finger in it. Put your finger in the soil to test. Like, don't just use your eyes um, to decide if you have enough water for your garden. Actually get your fingers down in the soil and poke down and see that it's actually penetrating down below. We'll talk about mulching and other things, to kind of preserve the water, maintain consistent moisture later, and that'll help. That will be a useful tool to help consistent moisture, so you won't have that problem of kind of dry surface and dry below and wet surface. So what food crops need for water is so now we're talking about on an ongoing basis as they mature. So we're just talking about the babies, the seeds, and the seeds germinate into the little cuties, and then the cuties get a little bit bigger, and then the teenagers, and they need a little bit less water. And then as they get to be more mature, they just need consistent watering and on a regular schedule. So we need to be paying attention to maintaining that roughly 1 thorough watering per week. If there's too much, if the roots of crops, if we overdo it, if crops are getting too much water, then we are pushing the air out of the soil, which is crucial for plant health and development, which can lead to mold and rot. And it also can, if we are doing light watering every day, so we're not oversaturating per se, but we're just doing a light watering, and it's only penetrating towards the top of the soil on a consistent basis, day after day, then it will not stimulate the plant to seek water deeper in the ground and make them weaker in terms of water needs during extended dry periods. If we do not water enough, clearly the plants will die. But if we water some and just not consistently enough, it can lead to low vigor in plants, cause stunted growth, lead to disease issues such as blossom end rot, there's an image in this slide that's a reference for blossom end rot, and ultimately lead to poor or no harvest. So if you have ever encountered a garden where some months had gone by and
Right. Do you have something to drink in here? A water or something?
Please
Yes.
mute yourself. Thank you. Um, so
You can kind of look at all the different locations that you have access to.
how are we doing on questions?
No questions yet.
Okay. Um, so too little water will lead to low vigor. I mean, the other thing is, I guess I was starting to think of an example. I remember when I was early on in my gardening, tenure, and I had these little pots, these gallon pots. I was trying to go some kale in, and they were not getting any bigger, and it was because I couldn't. There was so little soil in the pots, they just would not get beyond, and they would dry out so quick because of that. They were never getting bigger than teenager size. So you have to. It's one of those things that, like, stunted growth. The other piece I wanted to say is that, um, watering. We are talking about one of the primary tenets of avoiding, um, a cascade of other problems throughout the garden. So access to sunlight, access to nutrition, access to water, are all, and soil, also access to air, are all like kind of those crucial elements that if you make sure that all those are good, you're by and far your garden's gonna be much more successful. And if one of those is out of equilibrium, then you're tending towards, like, possibilities of disease or problems. Okay, here is a rough categorization of kind of some, not all, but a good amount of vegetable crops kind of categorized based on their root systems. So if just logically speaking, shallow rooted crops are going to probably need water somewhat more consistently. Um, and they also will suffer if they go extended periods of time without water. Well, I guess that's two in the same. And then the deeper rooted plants like the tomatoes, squashes, etc. here, can tolerate a little bit of drier periods. So this would also be a good reference for container gardening, because similar things like shallow rooted crops really work well in containers because of they don't need to have that extended root system to fill out the space. Now just like a little bit of technique.
I have one question, Keto.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Someone asking about what type of rooted plant is a beet. That's from Kim Miner.
Yeah, beets would be the medium rooted plant, similar to carrots. Oh, okay. So now I want to talk about what I think is a really good way, just one technique of really getting to that thorough watering once a week. So I'm going to describe it, and then I'm going to show a short video. So you're going to water. So imagine that you have a 4x8 raised bed, and it's broken up into four sections, or broken up, two sections. So you water the first side of it, the left side of the 4x8 raised bed, until you see the top of the soil begin to glisten. So you're putting enough water that it starts to puddle a little bit. And then you go and water the other side of the garden and do the same thing until water puddles to the top of the soil. And then you go back to the first spot and water it again. So then you're getting that initial penetration, and then you're getting it to penetrate more. So that's a good general rule. If you are like another kind of technique, and particularly if you're doing hand watering, which we'll talk about tools and techniques more later, is you only really need to do that at the base of every vegetable that you're growing. So say that you had you had 10 collard plants in that 4x8 raised bed. You can do that same technique, but just do like a circumference of a foot around each of the collard plants, where you're just watering where you need to and not watering the other part of the area, which could be stimulating weed seeds to grow. Okay, so I'm gonna stop screen really quick. And then I'm gonna go to this video and I'm gonna, what does that slide say? 321. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Oh, is that- are you guys seeing the video? Okay.
of water. Now, out here in the in-ground bed or even in the raised bed, it's a different equation because you're actually applying the water to the garden if you're hand watering. So then the question remains, how do I know how much I should water? Well, it's going to depend, of course, on a lot of different things. For example, take these tomatoes here. Tomatoes benefit a lot more from a deep, inconsistent watering than a little bit of water every single day. So I'm going to show you how I water these tomatoes, and then I'll show you how I water the corn up there and how that differs. So I'm using a water wand here, which I can talk about in a second, but the first thing I want to do is just moisten all the soil, because if it's dry, it's been dry for a while, you want to give it a little bit of a hydration before you start pouring it on. So let's do that. I call it the water weight water move. You water, you can see this water starting to run. It needs some time to actually moisten up the soil. There it's starting to get in. Now I can come in with a deeper water. Okay, here we go. Especially if you're using a water wand that puts out quite a bit of water at one time, unlike a little shower hose, then it's a lot easier to actually get the water into the subsoil if you wait a little bit instead of just dumping it all on at once. And with tomatoes, it's a really good idea to water around as well, deep and wide roots. And so watering anywhere from 1 to 2 feet even around your tomatoes is going to be a great idea. So how do I now know if I watered enough? Well, what I can do is just brush away my mulch and stick my finger down in here and take a little pull away. And if I take a look, I've got water down at least 4 or 5 inches, if not more. So I've given it a nice deep water. That's a success. Now, again, you want to just make a note of how long that took to get there and then replicate that the next time you water. There's our example of tomatoes, a plant that wants.
And so we, just so everybody knows, we will be sharing this slide set after the class. So if you want to watch that whole video, we will share that later as a, just to review or to watch the whole kit and caboodle. In terms of timing, so how often should I water? We already talked about that. Generally once a week. But just to like talk about, a little bit more of the details, after seeds have germinated, they should dry out some. So you want seeds to be consistently moist, but do let them dry out a little bit. It's a little bit of a balancing act there. Watering once thoroughly to ensure you have water reserved below the 6 inches, kind of what we've been talking about. During the hot summer months, expect to water more often. So I guess this just brings up a point as thus far, I've just been kind of using this very blanket rule of 1 inch of water 1 time a week. So that is like the baseline of like, I know what I need to water at least once this week. And then the secondary thing is you should be going out in your garden at least every other day to have a sense of where the water needs are. And having that finger test. If you have a rainy day or an overcast day and that's intermittent between you visiting your garden, likely you will not need to water too much in between, especially at this time of year. And what time of day? Ideally watering, this applies specifically for the summer months, but there's some kind of rules around it. But generally speaking, the morning is the best time. So first thing in the morning is ideal for watering your garden because it's a time for you to get your soil nice and saturated before the heat of the day, especially during the summer months. It allows any water that would have been on the leaves of the plant to dry off in the earlier morning sun. so they don't sit with an extended period of time with their leaves being wet. That particularly applies for some crops that are vulnerable to problems related to moist leaves. An example of that would be like blossom end, or not blossom end rot, powdery mildew on squash leaves or cucumber leaves are a result of extended periods of time with moisture on the leaves. So cool, damp, and dark is a vector for fungal activity. That being said, if you work a day job, you get up early in the morning, you're out the door, you don't have time to water the garden, and the garden needs to be watered. The time of day where you can get to the garden is the time you should water it. Like, don't let that hold you back from watering the garden. That's just a ideally best case scenario. Staying on top of a good watering routine is going to be really crucial to having a really successful garden. All right, keeping going here. So there are a bunch of options of how to water our gardens. I think most of them are self-explanatory, but I do want to just dig a little bit deeper on some of these and the pros and cons of each. So I think many folks are working from a home garden situation. Using a spigot is great. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of different types of sprinklers and hose sprayers and hand waters versus like soaker hoses and drip irrigation. If you do not have water on site, that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging. So I think a lot of people in this room may be in this circumstance. I know a lot of gardens across the city are, and that's partially why we do the WaterWise program, to help supply gardeners who do not have access to city water with some means of being able to capture rainwater for their gardens. There's a number of applications that could be used in the interim of having some kind of rainwater collection system. Some people will, if they can have like intermittent access, like maybe there's a neighbor that they can ask to use their hose every once in a while when they see them. You could do something like this image on the lower right and have what we call a field barrel, or just an open barrel that you fill up while you have access to water. We actually, I'm part of a group of other gardening related organizations across the city, and we're trying to have conversations with the fire department and the water department about the possibility of maybe the fire department helping out with people filling up their totes on their farms as a way to help mitigate. Another way, in terms of, in addition to rainwater collection, that farms who do not have access to water could be able to water their spaces. So there's interest there. A lot of fire departments are really friendly to the idea, and some fire departments are already doing it, like coming out and filling up people's 275-gallon totes or 55-gallon barrels so people can have water on site. But there's been a little bit of they just want to respect the water department, and so the water department seems amiable. So hopefully we'll have some developments on that this year to maybe be able to have some kind of system of helping people capture rainwater and have it on site, or not capture rainwater, get water from the city fire hydrants via the support of the local fire department. That being said, there are some systems, if you have a setup that is just a barrel or a 275-gallon tank on your spot, you either have to use a watering can or low flow drip irrigation, which we'll talk a little bit more about it, or some kind of pump to get water to your garden. So if you have a rain barrel, it does not have enough pressure to push a hose, just to make a statement there. How are we doing on questions?
You do have one question from Sandra Epps. Sandra, did you want to go ahead with your question, or I can read it for you?
Oh, I just planted some dahlias and I got bulbs. And my question is, in terms of watering, I read that is you can easily overwater them. And so, because I'm new at this and new with planting those, do you have any suggestions in regards to these ordering these dahlia bulbs?
I'm not a dahlia expert, but my maybe just maybe when you plant them, I don't know. I was trying to think about planting them with something that actually helps provide some drainage, so maybe some sand in the mix. There's got to be some resources on that, but I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'm gonna try and click, just keep going here. Just want to spend a few minutes on each of these things, and the pros and cons of some of the different styles of each. So here's a few examples of watering cans. Um, so watering cans are one of the cool things that all three of these watering cans have is a shower head. So those are particularly helpful for when you're watering seeds. So in any circumstance that you're watering seeds, you don't want to blast, you just planted these tiny little things and you don't want to blast a strong stream of water on them and push them around just by the pressure of the water. So a nice shower, kind of imitating Mother Nature, a nice shower of gentle water is going to be ideal. And it also kind of those smaller droplets tend to help tend to penetrate into the soil a little bit quicker. I really like this one in the lower left by Dram. It's got a long extension. It holds 2 gallons. So I like that you can kind of hold, like, tilt your arm down and it'll get, you know, the shower will get nice and close to the base of the plants. The only downside of those is the one I have that just don't leave them for extended periods out in the sunlight because the plastic does degrade over time. Mine basically became brittle and I need to and started to disintegrate. So plastic doesn't last forever. So maybe a cause for something like those water cans in the upper left. Sprinklers. Okay, so we're going from watering can be used with with a field barrel or a rain barrel or something where you fill it from a city water source or just like a collected rain source, and it works to transport water to the garden. Oscillators, an oscillating sprinkler will only work in the context of under city water pressure or the pressure from a water pump. So oscillating sprinklers are super convenient, but they're non-specific, or they just water everything. So in the context of water conservation, or if you're concerned about your water bill, then the oscillating sprinkler is probably not the best the best tool for you. I use them in my garden. Like it depends on the size of your garden. Like I have ones like this one. This one's a Gardena, I think. Melner is another brand. They have ways that you can adjust the width of the shower and how far it oscillates. So you could, in theory, set it up to just, if you like, in my case, I have my garden's like 20 by 40. I can set it up to kind of just water all of my vegetable garden. And even still, it's still being not specific. Like I would use a significantly less amount of water if I was using a drip irrigation system, which is watering just at the base of each of the plants. And in terms of convenience, the oscillators are great. It's like a set it and forget it. You can move it around the garden pretty easily. The other kind of downside to them is that as the plants mature, once you get to June, July, and your tomato plants are as tall as you, and you got collard plants up to your knees, like the oscillator is a little bit, you got to actually kind of raise it up higher to be able to spread the water around. And you also lose water to evaporation if it's warm during the time of day, or if it's a strong wind, you're losing water there too. So not super efficient, but convenient. It's a tool for the toolbox. They're really designed for like applications like this, when they're watering a lawn or just trying to water everything, give everything a drink. Similarly, impact sprinklers is a tool for the toolbox, but it can work in a situation that's for taller crops. Uh, but I think that it's pretty non-specific, and these are the ones that go. So it's a long stream of water going over a large area of land. It's also like the water will be, it'll be a lot at the very end of the arc of the water, and kind of a little bit in the middle. So it doesn't give consistent water over entire space. So really not designed for like vegetable garden uses, but it's a tool for the toolbox. Wobblers. So this is one, even though it's got similar qualities to the oscillating sprinklers or the impact sprinklers, it does a circumference, and it does a pretty good job of creating rain for a smaller circular footprint. So it's basically a sprayer that's it's got this loose thing on the top that's spinning with the water pressures, pushes the thing, and it spins, and it kind of spits water in a circular shape, right in diameter from the center of where the outlet there is. So this could be a really good tool for the toolbox. We use this at the KGD farm in certain applications. Now we're getting in, so those are the ones that are kind of like setup ones, and now we're getting into some of the hand connected to hose applications. This I would say is one of my favorite tools in terms of hand watering for the garden. You can be super specific with watering with it, so you can water right at the base of every plant. It allows you to water the roots. Like ultimately in our gardens, the leaves don't need to get wet. We don't need to get Mother Nature, when it rains, does that. That's fine. Plants can get wet. They're not immune to getting wet, but ultimately the water, where the water benefits the plant is in its root zone. And if we're using a watering wand, that's a really, really great tool for watering specifically. It also, you can get different size breakers, which in the upper right hand corner, you can get different size holes or different amounts of holes that would do finer streams of water or larger streams of water for different applications. But generally speaking, the ones that you get um, uh, all right, so let's keep going. So next would be kind of like multi-tools of sorts, are like the adjustable ones that have showers and full streams and misters. I use this in my garden. It definitely helps for certain circumstances. The one on the left, you can get to a really fine stream that's like an intense blast, and you can open it up to a fan. On the right, it's got all those multiple different options, from shower heads to full stream to mister, etc. Again, useful tools. I like the wand in the mix with that because you get that extension to go right at the base, but this is also, the gun is a really good option too. I wish they just made them to last longer. I just feels like I have to buy one every 3 or 4 years. Next, let's start to talk about watering right in the root zone. There's a few different applications for that. So there are soaker hoses. There's drip. Well, my slides are not cooperating. Okay. I'll just start with the soaker hoses. So essentially, soaker hoses are a long tube that you would put right in the garden at the base of plants. You can get them at most of the big box stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, etc. They're made from recycled tires, and what they are is they're just like really porous rubber tubes. They can do a pretty decent job of watering right at the root zone. And they're accessible because you can buy them locally. So they're a cool tool for that reason. But they do water somewhat inconsistently. So they may water a little, if you leave it on for an extended period of time, it may water heavily at the end of where the hose is and lighter kind of earlier on where the hose placement is. And then the other option would be drip irrigation. So drip irrigation is slightly, you know, pretty similar to the soaker hose. Um, hold on, okay. But drip irrigation is set up where it's engineered where there's a hole at every so often. It depends on the size. Like you can get them at 6-inch spacing, 12-inch spacing, etc., or 3-inch spacing. So different spacing between the holes. But the way that it's engineered is there's like these little. I'm not even sure exactly how it works, but the line fills up with water, and the way it works is it drips consistently from each one of those holes. So it's engineered that it won't water heavily at the end of the line. It drips drip every, you know, in a line, all the holes in all of the line, all 30 holes or whatever, are dripping at the same time. Drip, drip, which you can see in this lower left image. So this by and far, if it works out for, is a really, really great tool for water conservation, for efficiency. Like it's kind of, you can turn it on with a timer. It's a really great tool for watering in the garden. The only downside to it is that it's a spaghetti of hoses in the garden. So in certain applications, if you have tons of raised beds, for example, it kind of like is a little bit awkward, like you know, running hose from bed to bed, etc. There are some pieces that you have to make sure you have. So you have to have a filter in the line to make sure there's no sediment that gets into the hoses. You want to make sure that you put a pressure regulator on it. So with a city water pressure is often pretty strong, and we need to pressurize that to a certain PSI to make sure that it doesn't damage the drip system. So just to review a few of the pieces here, is that it goes from it goes into the pressure regulator, I'm sorry, into the filter, and then into the pressure regulator. And then that line running along the top there, we call that the header. So that's a solid piece of tube. And then you connect the drip lines to the solid piece of tube, and at the intervals that would make sense for your site. Here's just another illustration of it in action. You can see that you can see the little circular darker areas around the base of each of these pepper plants, showing that it's just dripping in the root zone of the plant. So super efficient in that way. Here is an example of
You have a question.
yes.
You have a question about the drip irrigation. That is from Sandra. Sandra, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so the question is for the drip irrigation.
I'll read it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
says drip irrigation works well with rain barrel and totes, correct? I like the water wine, but a big. Okay, go ahead.
No, you good. No, please, you do it.
Okay, he
Because
knows. He
my
just said, I
thing
like the
is,
water wine, but a barrel or tote
yeah,
system would not work. Okay,
right.
okay.
Right. So we're gonna get to it. So in these, all right, for the soaker hose and the drip irrigation, for most kits, need to have water pressure, need to have city water pressure. But we're gonna get to a low flow drip irrigation system. I'm gonna talk about it in a minute, which can work off of a rain barrel or a 275 gallon tote without the city water pressure. So pressure is an important thing. This system will not work. This particular system will not work if you don't have city water pressure.
And Keto, and we
Yeah.
have another question. I know you mentioned the type of watering things you use in your garden.
Uh-huh.
Someone was asking, is there a particular sprinkler that you use? That's from Stephanie.
The oscillating sprinkler. Um, I can't remember what it's called. Just, you know, I guess I would look for one that's got you see that this one's got tabs on it. that you can, excuse me one second. This one's, these got these orange tabs on it and like to the right, closer to the hose. Those you can make adjustments to the, how far it oscillates back and far forth. And I don't think this one actually has it in this image, but there's ones that you can adjust this way too. I can't think of a name of one that, off the top of my head, a brand that I particularly love. But, this Gardena one's fine, but I would look for, that, and I also like if it's plastic, that'll doesn't have as long as a lifespan as something like aluminum or something. So, um, s- okay, so going back, and now we're talking about. All right, so I just wanted to give a few examples of kits that you can get out in the world. I will have a resource page at the end of my presentation. But I do want to mention that DripWorks here is one company for drip irrigation supplies. Trickle EEZ, TRICKLEEZ. It's a funny name, TRICKLEEZ. Trickle E's is another one. This one's from AM Leonard. This is a soaker hose related kit, so that could be a good option. And now here's the one that I was kind of referencing earlier. This is that we were, in terms of being able to connect to a 5-gallon bucket or a rain barrel or a 275-gallon tote. You can use a low flow irrigation kit. So this particular style of drip irrigation is designed specifically to run on no pressure, or just the pressure of the water in the tank. Let's see. And so this is just like an example of what comes in the bucket or in the kit. Oh, this is some images of how it would be set up in a garden. I think the 5-gallon buckets, like we actually set some of these up this spring with helping people out with high tunnels, and 5-gallon bucket's going to go super fast. So you can see here, we set them up with 55-gallon drums. So we got Ajay and Tiffany here in this image. We set up with their kits to do early tomatoes at their sites. So this is about a month ago now. We were getting ready, and they have tomatoes planted in these spots now, early tomatoes in their high tunnels. But we set this up with the black plastic, which we'll talk a little bit later, and the drip line, the low flow drip line one line running down the center. You can see in the right image, it's kind of sticking out the bottom, and then they're connected, and the fittings for the barrel are just connected right to the bottom of the barrel, the underside of the barrel. That's me and Darius at his spot doing another one of the setups. Okay. So that's watering. Now we're going to talk a little bit about water conservation in the garden. Before we go on, do we have any questions?
Before you move on, yes, you have a question from Antoinette. Antoinette, you can go ahead with your question. Or I can read it. Her question is, what is the best way to get
I have a
the water
question.
to flow faster? Oh, go ahead.
That's from me. That question's for
Antoinette.
me.
Oh,
Okay, we'll do Antoinette. We'll do Antoinette's question, and then it sounds like
it
somebody
says,
else
what
had
is
it.
the best? Oh, that was somebody else.
Yeah, there's a second person.
Okay.
That's all right.
Okay. Okay. It says, what is the best way to get the water to flow faster from a water tube? The water just trickles out despite being elevated off the ground.
Yes. So There is no better, the only better way is to get a pump. Even if it's raised off the ground, water pressure, I mean, like, so if you have a 275 gallon tote, a 55 gallon drum, and a 5 gallon bucket, and they're all filled with water, and you have a spigot hooked up to each of them, the 275 gallon tote's gonna have more pressure because there's more weight of water pushing that water out. There's just the volume of the water, the weight of itself, creates the pressure. The 55 gallon drum, less weight, less water pressure. The 5 gallon bucket, very little. So, you, in any of those circumstances, connecting a hose to one of those is not really gonna do much for you. You're gonna need to do a watering can or filling a bucket or something. The other option is, if you have access to power, is to get a water pump. It could be a simple sump pump. I have some recommendations for ones that actually push, like, that'll do a little more pressure, if you want to run a sprinkler or something. There's some irrigation pumps that I'll be talking about a little bit later, but that's just the how it works. Okay, whoever else had a question? You want to jump in?
I would really want to know about those pumps at the end because my water situation at the garden is not good. So those pumps that you speak of, are they electric?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So, yeah, and I'm uh I've been doing a little bit of research, and I've been trying to find some time to actually find out. Out in the world, there are rechargeable batteries, like everybody, lithium ion batteries, or you see those big batteries that people have. Like, batteries are a thing now. Like, people have weed whips and lawnmowers that run on batteries. So there's got to be a solution to have a rechargeable battery pump situation. I haven't found one that I've been happy with yet. And I'm just like, I've been trying to, when I get some time, I'm gonna do some research, and hopefully by this time we do this class next year, I'll have some more information to share on that. Okay, keep it moving. So now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about conserving water. So now that we kind of know like what plants need and some strategies for getting them watered, let's just talk about some tools and techniques to conserve water in the garden. So to make it so you don't need to water as much, and also to help with, you can also help with a number of other things, including weeds. So how, just kind of posing the question, once I've watered my garden, how do I prevent it from drying out too quickly? So the first thing I said earlier that I want you guys to walk away from this class is stick your finger in it to know if it's wet enough. The second thing I want you guys to walk away from this class with is mulch is key. Mulch is huge for your garden. Mulch is a huge tool. Use mulch. But let's talk specifically what I mean about when I say mulch. So when we're mulching inside of our garden beds, we want to use mulch that more in the terms of straw mulch or leaf mulch. Wood chips are not ideal because they in terms of a vegetable garden, because they can tie up nitrogen in the soil. They also when they get mixed into the soil, it just makes it kind of not a great environment to try and start seeds. They just take a little longer to break down. Straw is amazing. Leaves are amazing and free. Other things you could use are shredded paper. And so let's look at some of these in specific. So what we're doing with mulch is we're trying to put mulch around our plants. When they're really young, we don't want the mulch right up against the plant. So you can see that, or in this image here, that especially towards the bottom, left-hand corner of the image, there's like a little dark area around the plant. You can see that it's not totally pushed up right up against the plant. We want to mulch all the soil around it, but we want to give that plant the space and not an avenue for something like slugs to crawl along that straw to eat the plant. So we want to give it a little bit of space, but as they get mature, you can cover the soil. The mulch does a couple different things in function. The mulch does a couple different applications. Because it's lighter in color, particularly the straw is like this, tan color, it will tend to reflect light more and heat. If it was black, it would tend to absorb more heat and which could stimulate more drying up. It also can prevent it limits light, so it also limits weed seeds from germinating and becoming a problem. We're always trying to do a relatively thick layer of mulch, 3 to 4 inches around annual vegetable crops, even deeper around perennials. And if you're talking about perennial gardens, you could even use wood mulch. It works great. Mulching around your fruit trees is a good idea. Mulching around your raspberries, good idea. Things like that. Here are some images giving some examples of straw mulch. You can see a pretty heavy straw mulch on this right-hand side. And that's just, creating an environment to really conserve that water in the soil. Here's some examples of using leaf mulch. When you're doing leaf mulch, ideally you want to shred it using a lawnmower or something of that, kind of that you can get leaf shredders too. The upper right-hand corner is a good example of what it looks like when the leaves are shredded up, and the lower left-hand corner is, when they're more full leaves. You can use full leaves, but you just want to avoid matting, because if there's a lot, if they're large full leaves, particularly like oak leaves that take a little longer to break down, they can actually create a barrier for that water penetrating into the soil. If the leaves are shredded up, there's more pore space and more air space for the water to penetrate through down below. You can use shredded paper, like shredded office paper, but it kind of looks trashy. And also, if on a windy day, it'll blow around your yard. So does it work? Yes. Are there, it's probably questionable about like maybe some of the bleaches that are in the paper. So people use it. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I would say, leaves and straw are hands down way better than that, but it is an option. And then the next thing, and this is what we use a lot at the Keep Growing Detroit farm, is using landscape fabric with holes burned in it. And this is especially if you're growing a garden on scale, like you're doing a large scale farm, a bigger area, more weed pressure, more area that needs to be watered. The black plastic, it does allow some water to penetrate, but you need to put some kind of really would need to put some kind of drip irrigation underneath it for it to be the most effective. Hand or overhead watering does not work very great for this application. So drip irrigation needs to be part of the equation if you want to explore using this method. But it does work really well for weed suppression, having the plants just water right in their place. So it is a time and energy saver for sure. Okay, so that was water conservation. And those are the biggest things I would say, other than the techniques I was talking about earlier in terms of watering in the morning, etc. Now I'm going to start to talk about rainwater collection, but I want to just talk about first, we're going to just talk about kind of understanding how much our gardens actually need, and then we can work backwards from that to figure out how much rainwater we want to collect. So this is when we're starting to think about water in our garden and we don't have access to water. this is one of the tools that we want to start to think about first. How much does my garden actually need for me to be capturing or getting to the site? How are we doing on questions?
Pretty good.
Okay. So first off, we just want to calculate the garden area. What is the square footage of the garden that we're working with? I'm giving an example here of a 20-foot by 20-foot garden. Though my image does not equate the same. It should probably be more of a square than a rectangle, but I think you get the picture. So for the square footage of the garden that we're going to use for our example is 20-foot by 20-foot is 400 square feet of a garden space that we're trying to make sure we have enough water for. And then we can use this conversion factor to have an understanding of how using this equation to have an understanding of how much water we need per week. So we know that gardens need at least 4 inches of water per month for our conversation earlier, 1 inch per week. And then we need to calculate calculate total gallons needed for a month. We're going to use the gallon conversion factor. So we're going to take that square footage, 400 times 0.623. That's going to help us get to gallons times 4. And that is going to give us how many gallons does my 400 square foot garden need in a month. And so in this case, I need almost 1,000 gallons for my 400 square foot garden. But as it turns out, Mother Nature helps us out. So just by looking at these calculations here in the growing season, April through October, we average 2 to 3 inches a month of rain. So, we could say that we're getting approximately 50% of our watering needs from Mother Nature. I do want to make a statement at this point that now we are in the time of climate change. It's a reality. We're dealing with it. It's something that's happening around us. And what one kind of implication of climate change is extended extreme weather events and inconsistent weather patterns. So, and we've already seen examples of that. Last year, we had in June, which is really unusual in Michigan, we had, I think, 4 or 5 weeks without rain. And whereas like this is, these are some trends from, previous years. So one of our kind of drives as time goes on to be like managing our gardens for climate change is to be able to have a plan for watering, whether it's going to be there or not. We also maybe, a result of climate change may be that we are going to have extreme, too much water at some times. And so we got to figure out strategies to mitigate on that edge too, which mulch can be a factor in that because of its water holding capacity and a lot of organic matter too for drainage. So we know that all that to say, we know that Mother Nature is going to help us out for, we can kind of lean on Mother Nature to leave, doing about 50% of our watering for a year. So if, after we've kind of taken that into consideration, we can say, divide that almost 1,000 gallons in half. And so we know we need to capture for our 400 square foot garden about 500 gallons in a month, or access water in some way. Everybody with me so far? Any questions about that equation? Does that make sense to you? Okay. So that's and that is a factor when we start to talk about rainwater collection systems. So let's just talk about some of the pros and cons of rainwater collection, and then we'll come back to the calculations in a bit. Rainwater catchment systems. Some of the pros are the ability to have water available independent of city water systems. We are diverting rainwater from our overtaxed sewer system. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And they're relatively easy to set up. It's basically, connecting a downspout from a gutter from a roof into a tank, is put very simply. That said, we may need to, there are some things that we should, be using to, we can't use that rainwater to drink. That rainwater is not potable. So we should be, we'll talk more about that as it goes on. Some cons of the rainwater catchment systems is they do not have pressure. So just to reiterate, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that these tanks are on stands that are about 1.5 feet above the ground. You can fill a watering can from them, but you cannot run a hose from them. You can, although, if I had a power source nearby, you could connect a power source to a pump that could push water from these tanks. I guess, so the notes here say the water is not potable and should not be used, should only be used in the soil zone of the plants. And then there's just requires some kind of seasonal maintenance. And I also want to say another pro of this particular system. So this is an image of our irrigation station that we have plans for on our Keep Growing Detroit website. I'll make sure that Naja shares that with folks after the class. So let's see, keep going here. Probably this is a reference guide on some of the maintenance related stuff that we have on our website. It's basically, talking a lot about the things that I've discussed, but I just want to mention that this is a useful tool for future reference. That's is a one-pager that we have on our website. Now I want to spend a minute. So we'll get into. Okay. So here's some of the benefits. Another a little more statement about the benefits of capturing rainwater. So when we are a combination of the technique, so this is talking about just making purpose for rainwater. So in our gardens, we as gardeners are diverting rainwater from the combined sewer system that's problematic in the city of Detroit. And I'll talk about that in a minute. By nature of having organic matter and compost in our gardens, that is a sponge for all the rain. So again, referencing climate change, in extreme weather events, there needs to be some place for that water to go to not cause problems for our sewer systems, cause flooding in basements, etc. And the landscape that has got deep-rooted plants and rainwater collection systems and fields with lots of compost and mulch, etc., is much better at mitigating the water and recycling it. Whereas developed landscapes with hard surfaces and streets with nowhere for the water to go is very poor infiltration into saving that water, and it ends up in our sewer system. And so that's where we get to talking a little bit about just explaining a little bit more about Detroit's combined sewer system. So our system is old, in some cases, our sewer lines are still made out of wood. It's crazy. And when it was, in many neighborhoods, it was the rain from your gutter was hooked up to a drain that went to a drain pipe that went directly into the sewer system, in addition to our sewer drain and then our wastewater. So as time went on, there has been an effort, and we should not be connecting our gutters to the combined sewer system any longer. If that's something that we should all be paying attention to on our houses, that we can divert those into our gardens or into our rainwater collection systems, et cetera. And that's gonna not contribute to not overtaxing the system. So if if we have regular water events, you can see in this image here that the drain and the water from the roof and your sewer drain from your toilet and your shower, etc., they go down into the combined sewer system and they go to a treatment plant. But if we get extreme rain events in the interim, they will go to this outfall pipe on the left. So the system gets overwhelmed. There's no place for the water to go. So it's either going into the river or into your base or into the basements of people, like of many neighborhoods across the city, Far East Side, etc. Causing lots of problems with pollutants, unprocessed, fecal water ending up in our rivers. Motor oil, fertilizers, pesticides ending up in our streams. It's bad. And this is a better image of what happens when the combined sewer system is overflowing. So all that to say is that what we're doing with rainwater collection and our gardens is really a tool in mitigating extreme weather events kind of impacted by climate change, etc.
Before you move on, we do have a question from
Yes.
Gio. Gio, did you want to go ahead with your question, or I can read it?
Oh, oh yeah. Well, thank you. I'm appreciate that. I was just curious if hey Keto, I was curious if the low flow kit works with the rain catchment system.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
It works.
So, yes, we just said that just like we had that set up with Tiffany and Darius and them, same scenario. So you could have the rainwater connection system to a 275 gallon tote or whatever, and have that low flow drip connected, which is what we did in this situation. Can't see it very well in this image, I'm sorry, but just to say that it is there.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so we did a little research. We did a research project a few years ago. We partnered on a research project to talk about the impacts of gardeners using water, and I want to just highlight a few of the findings. Rainwater harvesting is a viable stormwater management strategy, and we just got to make sure that we're using the water. And just to say that the garden beds were amazing at holding water. So the amount of water that a well-maintained, high organic matter garden or farm can hold on to is much higher than most averages that like the DWSD manual assumes for topsoil, etc. Organic matter is huge in that way. So like our gardens and farms are a great tool in that way. Okay, so now coming back to rainwater collection. I referenced earlier there's essentially two different ways that we can be capturing rainwater. We have a design for our freestanding rainwater collection system that we call it the irrigation station, which is just a pretty simple lean-to structure that can function as a shade seating area or something like that. But the biggest, the boon to the best rainwater collection you can do is the bigger the roof that you have, the more rainwater you can collect. So when we are looking at advising people about collecting rainwater, we always ask them first, is there a house nearby that, or a building, a house, a garage, a structure that we can capture the rainwater off of the roof? Because the bigger the roof, the more the water you can capture. So on the left here, you can see this system that this is one of the WaterWise awardees from a few years back. And this was on a house that was approximately, I think about it was like a 50 by 100 house, and we set up the gutter downspouts, and then we set up a stand to gang 3 different tanks together. You'll notice that we painted the tanks, so we limit light penetration into the center, and then we combine the bottoms of the tanks with some PVC piping to so the water, when the water goes into the first tank, they all fill up consistently together. If we're trying to like we're trying to right size a system for we're trying to figure out, we have a roof, we have a garage that we're trying to figure out how much rainwater I would capture in 1 inch of rain or an average rain. We're going to use a pretty similar, basically the same calculation strategy, is basically get the square footage of that roof. In particular, if you're doing a roof, you have to be aware of the downspouts. So most times, and how many there are, and like, because like most times houses will have at least 2 or or sometimes 4 in the 4 corners downspouts. Well, if some of that water is going down the downspout to another spot, then you're not getting the ability to capture that. So you might have to rework your gutters to go all to one downspout to focus all that water to go into your tanks for collection. So all that said, we figure out, now we're coming back to this calculation for a second. So as an example, we're looking at a 15-foot by 15-foot shed. And we want to capture rainwater off of it. We know that there's only one gutter downspout. So 15 by 15 is 225. So based on what we learned earlier, that we're getting 2 to 3 inches a month of rainwater, based on kind of averages from history. And we're using that as part of the equation. So we're going to use, in this case, we're going to use 2 as the example. 2 inches times our gallon conversion factor, 0.623, times the square footage of the roof equals the potential rainwater can be collected from that roof in a month's time. So we could also do that calculation times 1, just to get a sense of, like, in an inch of rainfall, how much we might capture. But in this case, this rainwater collection system for this shed that's 225 square foot is going to yield approximately 280 gallons in a month for water collected. So, in the examples here for our simple freestanding rainwater collection systems, the one on the right, it can in 1 inch of rain, I think captures approximately 80 to 90 gallons of water. So the plans for these are on our website, and we'll make sure that we share them with you. Naja, please make a note so we remember to follow up to make sure we do a link for the plans if you want to build one of these freestanding structures yourself. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Other applications for rainwater collection, and this is a really great one. This is one we do this at the Keep Growing Detroit farm, is doing a gutter system on a high tunnel. So if you have a hoop house or a high tunnel, or you have plans for one, that you can relatively easily put a gutter system on them. And so basically, I don't think so. What we do is, so there's some finer points of that, and I'm going to discuss some of those finer points of hoop house
Hold on
gutters.
1 second, Keto. We have a
Yeah.
few people saying that there's not any sound. So let's see what that's about. I can hear you. Is
Can you hear
anybody else
me?
having sound issues? I have 2 people saying that they can't. Okay. Dr. Sean said it's back. Okay, it's good now. Okay, go
I was
ahead.
moving around the bar, so maybe I pushed the thing accidentally.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I said a lot of good stuff in that time, but we got it on the recording, so don't worry about it. So in terms of capturing rainwater from a hoop house, the system we've kind of figured out is to use vinyl gutters that come in 10-foot sections. Essentially, I don't love vinyl gutter systems. They're kind of cheap and trashy looking, but you need to, if you have a hoop house, you can't leave the gutters up year round. Because under any kind of snow load, the snow will slough off the house and trash the gutters. So you definitely want to do a situation where you're gonna have to, at the end of the season, take the gutters down. I have a whole budget for materials for this, but they're the clip-on 5-inch gutters that you can get from Home Depot. In this case, we have them going to 1,100-gallon tanks at the back of our farm here. There's 4 1,100-gallon tanks that we use. And how we use them to irrigate the farm is we use irrigation pumps. So essentially, we take one pump. We just use a standard sump pump, and we transfer. We only irrigate out of this one that's closest to us in this image, and we use the irrigation pump from that. And then we have another pump that we just use to transfer all the water from each of the other pumps into this tank, which is a pretty good system that works out well. And just reiterate that we're making sure there's some kind of signage on our tanks that the water is not the water is not potable. In this case, these tanks are actually solid black, but definitely want to make sure that you limit light penetration, so you won't have algae growth in your tanks, and then you want to filter the water. Another thing, here's a little bit more things to think about. So when you're locating any kind of rainwater collection system, you should make sure to be aware of city setbacks, 5 foot from a neighboring property, no closer than 20 feet from the front of the, from the sidewalk. We talked about sizing your system. So, essentially, when we're trying to size a system for our particular garden, we're doing that calculation of how much water does my garden need, and then trying to figure out either can I capture from a roof that's big enough to give me that kind of water, or would a freestanding irrigation station be enough to help my situation in the meantime. So in terms of once you have rainwater captured, the general recommendation is that you use that water within 2 weeks, or if you can't use that water within 2 weeks, to consider using a little bit of bleach to sanitize. You want to limit bacterial growth, which can be a factor that can be a health concern. So it's a really nominal. It's like a tablespoon. I think it's on this. Maybe this. Yeah, here it is. An ounce of kitchen bleach per 55 gallons of water is enough, and you stir it, let it sit for 24 hours, and that would help with sanitizing the water periodically. In addition to that, you're just using this water for watering at the base of the plants, and you're rinsing your plants really well before you eat them or share them with others. Okay.
You want to take a couple of questions before you
Yeah.
move on?
Yeah.
Sandra, I see you have another question about a DIY. Did you want to go ahead with that?
Yes, I actually saw a video recently of a young lady who took a Ace garbage can, cut out a square on the top and flipped the top. I think it was a 50-gallon. She put a plant over it to block it and to fight off mosquitoes. But however, what is your thoughts on that? And you don't have to worry about a downspout because the water from the rain just comes straight into the round top and it captures the water. So I kind of wanted to get your personal input on that.
So, surface area equals volume of water. So if you only have the size of the top of a garbage can, though you're losing a lot of potential for rain. You need a large surface area for the rain to hit and collect and to go into your can. I've also seen people talk about these cones. There's like, it's like a big kind of cone surface area. Um, and again, so like if you need a significant amount of water, I mean, which most gardens do, a 55 gallons of water is, um, based, like we did that calculation earlier, a 20 by 20 garden needs roughly 500 gallons of water in a month. So that's 10 of those trash cans. It's, so the math there, as an example, is not going to really get you to the amount of water that you're really looking to capture. I've played around with, in my mind, like ideas of, I think you could do things with large tarps. It would be kind of, it's aesthetically is probably not the most beautiful looking thing,
Right.
but you could figure out a way to like string up a tarp and channel the water, especially if you're to a can or something along that, like along those lines. But ultimately, it's got to be the big surface area equals the amount of water that you're going to be able to capture. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. And Vincent, I see your hand up. We'll get to you next. I'm gonna go to Lydia. You had a question about the mosquitoes. You can go ahead.
I think that he answered it with a little bit of bleach or using it within 2 weeks.
Cute that I make up my own.
Okay. So you said your question was answered?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's a legit, we should talk about it. It's a legit
Mhm.
question, like what to do about mosquitoes. So, one, limiting access to the inlet of the water, like whether that be, I didn't actually speak to it well enough, I think. You should have, at the inlet, you should have a filter or a screen of some sort. It's kind of hard to see. It's kind of hard to see it in this image, but there is, like, I did, basically take a piece of window screen and screwed it, or like stapled it or attached it basically to this inlet. And that limits the ability um of the of mosquitoes to thrive. I think also, I mean, using the water, that was a good point. Bleach, sanitation. um I would avoid using any of those like mosquito dunks or any of that stuff, because you don't want to be introducing whatever that stuff is into your garden.
Okay. We will jump over to Vincent. You can go ahead with, I see you have a few questions. Go ahead with your question. I can ask it for you. Where you say, where can you buy it? Are you talking about the screen he just mentioned? All right, we'll come back, Vincent. Rachel, I see you have your hand raised. You can go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Keto.
Rachel?
So if we are not selected for the WaterWise program, but we have all of the things to build it, how do we get help putting up our rainwater catchment? Can we still get technical assistance or refer
Yeah,
to like a build crew or somebody?
right. So so let me just explain for those who aren't aware or aren't familiar. Um, the past couple of years, we've been doing this thing called the build crew, which the intention of that is we get lots of requests. Like, we only are able to do so many builds a year. We're only able to award so many sites a year. We only have so many people on staff. But we recognize that a lot of people are interested in this kind of infrastructure for their sites. So we've been doing, trying to work with people with some building experience, just to share about how these things go together and, just like to do them together and have, so we've been slowly building a repertoire of skilled folks that can help with those kind of projects. So that could be something where I can't guarantee it just based on people's availability, et cetera, but that would be one avenue. For sure, if you are not awarded, but you're still trying to figure out how to get this thing constructed, reach out to me. Let's have a consultation. I can definitely, even if in that circumstance, if there wasn't somebody that was available, I think that we could probably figure it out. All that said, I do think we can find somebody for you. But if we were
Yeah, if
not,
you have someone to refer me to, that'd be great. Cause like if we have the materials and the resources,
right,
and we end up not getting selected for WaterWise, it would still be great to have someone guide us on this building journey.
right,
Um,
which I could
yeah,
help with, or like help you figure that out. Like, as
okay. So I should just email you.
yeah.
All right. Thank you, Keto.
Yeah, and that goes to, anybody. Well, hopefully we'll get, I want to help everybody, but hopefully we'll have a good cohort of folks. And trying to, slowly we're building this community that can help each other. So we're, just reach out if you have questions. I'll help as much as I can.
Right. We have a few more questions. Sharon Luckerman, was your question answered about the filter?
Actually, and I asked about, the filter and you said a screen. I have a screen, but it was also smelly at one time and some friends recommended some sort of little rocks to put on top covering the screen. I guess that also protected like leaves and stuff falling in. But is that a way of, I'm more concerned about the smells or the bacteria that would happen
Well,
to
if it
the
smells bad, it's probably means you should sanitize the water, or I mean, if it gets real bad, foul smelling water means like there's funk going on, and maybe you should empty the tanks, clean them, and start fresh.
Okay. But can rocks on, are there, they look like volcanic rocks, little things at the very top. Is that something to put on top of the screen? Or is that not
Sure, I
necessary?
don't think, I guess the only concern I would have about that is like, what is it is it causing a lot of splashing? And like diverting
Oh,
are you losing water in that situation? If you're not, then no, it's great. Rocks are used in all kinds of filtration methods, and it's a useful tool. I think that's a good idea generally.
great, thanks.
Awesome. All right, Linda K, you're up next. Go ahead with your question.
Hello. Hey, how y'all doing? So, what's the average cost for one of those large water containers? What's
These 1,100 gallon tanks are,
yes.
last time, so I'm gonna get to resources in a minute here. We were almost there. There you go, where we are. Check out National Tank Outlet. I haven't checked their prices since I didn't check that. I didn't get a chance to check them before but last time I checked, they were about $1 a gallon. Well, no, they were more like, I think I got those for like $800 each. But National Tank Outlet, like they're a national distributor. There's like different distribution sites. There is pricing on the website. They have different sizes and shapes, and colors too. I wish we would have been able to get a cooler color than just like plain black. There was like oranges and blues and stuff. But call them to get you can get some pricing on the website, but I found out that like after I called them to get a quote that they were able to give me a better price, so that's definitely worth looking into. Okay, other questions before I talk more about the resources?
Dr. Shine just popped in with a question. You go ahead, Dr. Shine.
Have you ever heard of using food grade peroxide to sanitize the water from bacteria?
I know, I'm not sure. So like I know that with bleach, like we have our water that we drink or whatever, our city water is chlorinated. So I know, and I'm familiar with that in that it volatilizes over time, and off gases. I'm not sure how, um, peroxide would play, and it seemed, I'm just also would be wonder how much it would cost. Um, but, if you know, if you find out more information, I'm curious.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Anybody
Alrighty.
else? Okay, so, so you may have noticed that I didn't talk about 55-gallon drums very much in this. I did a little bit, I guess. But in terms of rainwater collection, off of a structure, I'm really tending towards larger tanks. So at the very least, the 275-gallon totes. Um, I think these are, like a 55, like we already talked about how much water a garden needs, right? And a 55-gallon drum, especially on a house, fills up, and I'm sure some of you already know this, fills up in seconds in a rain event. I mean, most of our houses are, pretty significant in terms of square footage. Like if you do the math real fast, like you'll see that like, oh, 1 inch of rain, I'm gonna have 300 gallons off of my roof or more. And so you're just filling up that 55-gallon drum, and then the rest is going, to the overflow. Um, and so I definitely think that the 275-gallon totes is one of the better ways to go. You always want to make sure that you get food grade, because sometimes these come with, like, the car washes get the soap that's stored in them, or like diesel fuel or whatever. So you want to get food grade. Sometimes like you can get them from pot manufacturers, or I've got ones that had apple cider vinegar in them, or alcohol, all the, food grade alcohol. All those work just fine. I do not currently have a great source for them, other than, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. Um, there are some companies that you can order from online, but they are pretty expensive, more like $150 to $200, where when I get it, you should be able to get a 275-gallon tote for somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to $100. Paying $200 for one of those things is kind of crazy. But look around, like, I guess just like Facebook Marketplace seems to be like on the regular. You may have to drive out to the boonies to pick them up, um, but I think the 275-gallon totes are in terms of local availability great. 55-gallon drums. I can see, after working with everybody on these setups in the hoop houses that I was referencing earlier. I'll show you the image. Where'd it go? So like the way that we set these up, filling these barrels or using them like at the head of a raised bed, for example, with the low flow drip. I think that this style system has a lot of potential for a lot of gardeners with limited access to water, because you can kind of figure out, filling up the barrel periodically, and it's really efficient in getting the water to the roots of the plants. So in terms of other resources, I already mentioned the National Tank Outlet. I didn't have the website here, but you can just Google that. It'll pop right up. We talked about pumps earlier, and I want to make sure for the person that said they were interested, that to check out rainharvest.com. And I didn't actually say the model. It's GP 400 or GP-400 or GP-800. I'm going to put it in the notes. Oh. Oh. All right. That took way longer than I expected. Sorry about that. Okay. And that, after that, I guess drip irrigation references, I talked a little bit about, come on, slides. I talked about trickleys earlier a little bit and drip works. And the low flow, I didn't talk about the low flow drip irrigation sourcing. So the low flow drip irrigation kits come from Chapin Living Waters. So there, it was basically a system that was designed for developing countries to have systems for, irrigating crops. So they're like a not-for-profit if you go directly to their website, but there is a link on their website that goes directly to purchasing kits. They're pretty inexpensive. I think for the 100-foot kit for like a smaller garden size, it's like less than $50. And I've had some good experience with those. So at this point, it's like, here's my contact info. Please reach out if you have questions or I can help you with any assistance around any of this stuff. And just willing to, let's open it up for questions, for more questions. Anybody else out there?
Yes, I have a question.
All right. What you got?
Okay. I don't know if someone asked this already. I'm probably missed it. So if we're accepted to receive the rain catchment system for our garden, do we have to provide our own barrel?
No, so in terms of the folks who applied for the WaterWise program, I guess to clarify kind of what's included in the kit and how it's gonna work is we will have a consultation with you, assessing your situation and deciding on what application of rainwater collection makes most sense, whether that be capturing rainwater from existing building or building a freestanding structure. We would provide all the materials and the labor to construct the tunnel. We do ask that you participate on some level or have somebody from your site participate on some level. And then in terms of timeline, our building schedule starts in June and we're doing roughly two projects a month, June through October, including some high tunnel construction. And so we would work out a schedule with the cohort of folks who are awarded what made most sense for each of the sites, as and trying to work with people as best as possible under those circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Clark, you can go ahead with your question. Well, Clark had a question about squirrels messing with their crops after the effective water system has been implemented. This is a pest question.
Squirrels are a difficult one. Squirrels are squirrely and can climb and get into a lot of situations. They can, they have pretty much killed my apple crop for the past several years, my apple and pear crop, because my trees are along a fence line and that's a perfect thoroughfare for them to run along the fence and jump in the tree. But all that to say, squirrels are tricky. I'm not, I guess if you want to speak up and say specifically what crop you're talking about, or, you know, what particular problem, and maybe we could strategize specifically around that. Other than that is like, you know, grow enough that the squirrels can have a few, or figure out some way to cage or separate, you know, them from being able to access the stuff. But it's a little bit tricky because they do have the ability to climb in most situations. Cool. Anybody else?
And nothing else in the chat.
Okay. Okay, y'all. Well, I hope you got some useful information from the presentation today. I'll put my email one more time in the chat just in case. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out. And I guess if nobody else has that last minute question, we can wrap it up for the evening.
Yep.
All right, y'all. Good
All
night.
right. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
And get those questions asked. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Watering wisely in the garden. What food crop